welcome back to the Rise of the Inspirational podcast. I am just so honored and so humbled to welcome to the show Dr. Gabor Maté and to get to share his amazing knowledge, his wisdom, and his insights with you today. I'm personally so invested in this show because Dr. Maté's work has had such a profound impact on the trajectory of my own life. And so I'm so happy to propel all that he shares. I'll share a bit more on my story and how this is related with Gabor in a bit. But first, our world-renowned Dr. Gabor Maté. He's a retired physician who, after 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, worked over a decade in Vancouver's downtown east side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. Gabor is a best-selling author of 4 books published in a whopping 25 languages. He's an internationally renowned speaker, highly sought after for his expertise on addiction, trauma, childhood development, and the relationship between stress and illness. His book on addiction received the Hubert Evans Prize for Literary Nonfiction. For his groundbreaking medical work and his writing, he's been awarded the Order of Canada, our country's highest civilian distinction. He's also been awarded the Civic Merit Award from his hometown of Vancouver, where we're filming from today. His books include In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress, Scattered Minds, and the Origins of Healing of Attention Deficit Disorder. And last but not least, Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Matter More Than Peers, co-authored alongside Gordon Neufeld. If you have not come across Dr. Maté's work before, you are in for a treat today. If you're keen to learn more about Dr. Maté, please join his e-news list at drgabormaté.com. Gabor, I humbly welcome you to the show. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you. As you know, I interviewed you for my own next book, and my conversation with you forms a very essential part of the healing chapters of my own next book. So it's the pleasure and the honor are mutual.
I'm just so honored to get to be in that book and get to be part of your story that you're sharing with the world. So we have a pretty magical connection, you and I. So I'm really happy to share this as we're going forward. Gabor, take us back, if you don't mind, to your years in family practice and what really inspired this passion for you pursuing all that you've done in research and dedicating your life to this world of stress and its impact on the mind and the body. What really inspired that?
Well, the first thing that inspired me was my own problems. I mean, I was in my mid-40s when I had 3 children. By the time I realized just how depressed I'd been much of my life. And there's a book written in the 1960s called I've Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me. And when you're in a certain state for a long time, you think that's normal.
You don't see it.
You don't see it. This is life, but and only when I wasn't depressed did I say, oh boy. And then I had to start, well, what happened? So part of my big impetus for me was just my own misery, if you like, with my depression and anxiety and my rages and my ADHD and everything else. And then the impact of all that on my own kids and my own family and my own relationship.
And you wanted answers.
Yeah. And so I had to start looking at, well, what happened here? And then parallel with that, in family practice, I began to notice that people's physical illnesses had everything to do, well, for the most part, particularly the chronic illnesses, cancer, which you've had a close brush with, and autoimmune diseases and chronic illnesses of all kinds, had everything to do with people's emotional lives, including their earliest childhood experiences. In fact, significantly, their earliest childhood experiences. And so that the origins of adult disease actually begin in early childhood, and even, as I found out since, in the womb.
Wow.
And then I worked in addictions in the downtown east side. And then again, I had to ask, well, what happened to these people? Why are these people, despite their HIV and despite their hepatitis C and despite their poverty and despite their being outside the law, were they still so compelled to seek their addictive substances? And again, it took me back to what happened to them to form their lives, their psychologies, their brains, So it all added together. And of course, none of this happens in isolated human lives. It all happens in the context of a culture and a society. And so that's the book I'm writing now. But ultimately, it's just, Erica, an old spiritual teaching that goes back to the foundational experiences of every religion or spiritual path, that it's all one and it's all connected. And
Powerful. Yeah.
That's really what it is for me.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And it's so timely too, because just before this recording, we just recorded a show with a beautiful young woman who opened up on her journey with alcohol addiction.
Yeah.
And she shared a very raw telling. It's really powerful. And she said clearly, straight out, that she had been feeling like the black sheep of her family, right? And she felt so isolated on that path. And when she had her first drink, that filled that void.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of my favorite quotes of yours is, it's impossible to understand addiction without asking what relief that addict finds or hopes to find in the drug, in the addictive behavior, or in the addictive behavior. And it's so true, right? And whether it's addiction or, as in my journey in cancer, for me, I had this profound awakening, I think just in the nick of time, right? Where, there's this societal pressure to be positive no matter what comes at us. And I very much believe in that positive mindset, but our authentic, our true, genuine positive mindset can only come after we've really been real about those negative emotions. And it was really hard on my journey because, I was very optimistic, very focused on that future, and had this profound awakening where I just allowed myself to feel the hurt of all that cancer had ripped away. I had to stop nursing my youngest. I missed my oldest celebrating his 5th birthday, right? I had to let myself go through those emotions of that. And when I did that, it was so freeing. And at the same time, I also let myself express all these emotions from childhood experiences, from previous hurts that I had bottled up, right? And I really believe that when we bottle those, when we bury those emotions that we try to just push on from, and we're like, oh yeah, everything's okay, right? That transforms within us, whether it's to depression, whether it's to cancer, who knows? But it has such a profound effect. And so I'm just so fascinated by your work. I was actually given your book, as you know, when I was go as a busy sports chiropractor, and people saw that I was doing too much. And I didn't even stop to take the time to read it. I was very humbly saying thank you and put the book up on the shelf. And only years later, after this awakening that I had in the hospital, just before I heard the words of this 2-month prognosis, did I pull out your book. And gosh, I just remember feeling, had I only pulled this out years ago.
Yeah, but you know what? You probably wouldn't have responded to it. You would have said, that's interesting, but it's got nothing to do with me. I mean, you have to be ready for it, right?
You're probably right. And for me, I do think I needed those 4 white walls of my hospital room to hear those lessons of when the body says no, right? And only then did I really reflect and think, gosh, my body has been screaming at me for years to listen and to pay attention and to hone in on what was happening in my mind and my emotions that I had buried so far down beneath. And this all just came in the nick of time. I don't know why I'm here today, right? But this awakening was a profound moment that really let me transform during that journey and attain the success that I've had. So I just admire your work so much, Gabor.
Well, Erica, to hone in on something that you said about suppressing yourself in childhood. There's this very famous Canadian psychologist, mega best-selling author called Jordan Peterson. And this book is sold, I don't know, millions of copies around the world, 12 Rules for Life. And here's what he advises. He says, an angry child should sit by himself until he calms down. Then he should be allowed to return to normal life. That means the child wins instead of his anger. The rule is, come be with us as soon as you can behave properly. That's a very good deal for the child. This is a very good deal for the child and for society. Well, it isn't a very good deal for the child. It's life-threatening for the child because that suppression of healthy anger and healthy emotions undermines the immune system and totally dysregulates the body's stress apparatus. So it's the source of a lot of illness. I mean, even when you talk about depression, if you look at the word depression, what does that mean? It means to push something down. You know what depression starts with? By pushing down your feelings as a child in order to please society, or in order to please your parents. So, from the point of view of a society that wants people to be conformist and non-rebellious and compliant, it's a good deal. From the point of view of the human being, it's a life-threatening dynamic. So, but this is the education people are getting.
Yeah. It's like that alone is so enlightening for us as parents, right? As to how we can help guide our kids through those moments of anger and through adversity. I think that's so powerful. Yeah. Because it starts then, right? How we're bearing it all down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another quote that I love of yours that I'd like you to expand on a bit, please. Anything that is wrong with you began as a survival mechanism in childhood.
Well, so we just gave an example of it.
Yeah.
As a child, you have no bigger need and requirement than to connect with your parents, to be attached to them, because otherwise you don't survive. So when a child gets the message, like Jordan Peterson would have us learn, that an angry child is not normal, it's not acceptable, the child has two choices. It's not a choice at all, but theoretically, I could stay angry and express and experience what I'm experiencing, or I could disconnect from my feelings to stay connected with my parents. Well, what's the child going to choose? The child doesn't choose consciously. The child's brain, which is in survival mode, will automatically suppress the feeling. So that's an adaptation. That depressing of emotion is an adaptation, but it's an adaptation that costs us heavily later on. So that it's well understood now that adaptations to early life experience can help us endure and survive those experiences, but they become the source of pathology later on, mental and physical pathology. So, it's like this. It's like here in Vancouver, we're not that cold in the wintertime, at least not so far this year. But let's say you live in Edmonton or some other cold part of the world, you can't go outside without putting on really warm clothing, and which is great. That's an adaptation. But try wearing that same warm clothing in the summertime. It's going to kill you. So an adaptation in one setting then becomes a source of pathology in another setting. And that's what happens. Those early adaptations become sources of pathology later on.
Yeah, astounding. And just to take this back, so when Dr. Maté and I had been speaking originally, I shared, just as I shared with you all, that I was this go sports chiropractor, right? When the hours between 8 to 5 had filled up, I started working earlier. You can't leave someone in pain. I was always trying to help people get across that finish line. And I was passionate about serving in that way. And Gabor had asked a rather pointed question, right? Why did you want to be so busy? And why were you going above and beyond to serve others at risk of your own health? And I didn't know. I was just so saturated and so in that groove of loving every moment of it. I was so passionate to serve. And Gabor asked me about my childhood. And of course I said, yes, very happy childhood, grew up boating, but when he really pulled out those questions at the age of 12, I had heard some information that could have threatened my mom's health. And I became really worried of her survival, right? And it was, information that I wasn't comfortable in sharing with anyone else. And Gabor really filled in the blanks for me then, because he was basically saying, look, like, you're afraid of being alone in that time, and you didn't have that connection to be able to really express that at that time. And then later in life, that probably came out as my, addiction to working so much. But
I'd say it's even more than that. When you said you can't leave anybody in pain and you're a sports chiropractor, who's the first person who pain you desperately wanted to take away?
Yeah, you're right. Probably my own. And I would go into that clinic.
Well, your own, but also your parents.
Oh, yes, true. Yes. Of course.
When children, when infants actually or young children experience their parents in pain, they make themselves responsible for it. That's just automatic. So I can tell you an experience that I had of being in a therapist's office, actually working with mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms. So I was as a therapist. This is 5-6 years ago now, in my early 70s. And I've taken this mushroom, and I'm lying there on the mat. The therapist is a woman in her late 50s at that point. I know exactly who I am, Gabor. I know I'm an author, and I'm a doctor, and I'm a parent, and I'm so-and-so, and this is so-and-so, she's a therapist. At the same time, I'm experiencing myself as a 1-year-old infant.
Wow.
So it's like a double-minded experience. And I'm looking at this therapist, and she's my mother. This is all the while knowing that actually this is a therapeutic experience, and I'm fully aware, but at the same time, the emotional experience of the 1-year-old is that I'm looking at my mother, this therapist, and I start crying, and I say, "I'm so sorry I made your life so difficult." So already at 1 year, I was taking on the responsibility.
1 year of age.
Yeah, and I see this all the time. And then of course, I'm suggesting that even for you, I mean, I don't know, and we don't need to go into it, but I'm suggesting that likely for you, the responsibility for your parents' pain didn't start at age 12. Depend on what stage your mother was in when she was pregnant with you and when you were a small infant. These things you couldn't recall, but emotionally they're stamped in. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that so much of our emotional makeup and then how we live our lives have to do with our earliest formative experiences. And it's not because their parents didn't love us or didn't do their best.
Of course.
It just has to do with how stressed they are themselves when we're small,
Yeah. Please extrapolate more on this too, because we're all going to experience these hardships and trauma. But as you say, it's not the trauma that affects us, but it's how we internalize that trauma, right?
Well, how we internalize it is the trauma. So the trauma is not the external experience.
Yes.
It's not what happens to us. The trauma is what happens inside of us as a result.
Yeah.
So that when my mother was stressed and wartime hungry, and I don't have to go into the details again, but when she's stressed and terrified, and she's not happy, what do I make that mean? I'm not good enough.
Right.
That's the trauma. The trauma is not that I was a Jewish infant under the Nazis in Hungary, which has created some terrible circumstances. The trauma is what I made that mean about myself, which is that I'm not good enough.
So what are tools that we can help others use in these moments of trauma as to how we perceive it and what happens within us? How can we change that dialogue, right?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to get curious. And rather than assume that this is just life normally. I mean, if you're chronically suffering, if you have physical illness, you have mental illness, that can, I don't recommend it to anybody, but like in your case, it can act as a wake-up call.
A profound wake-up call.
Well, yeah. And of course, unfortunately, as amazing as Western medicine is, and really Western medicine saved your life, but at the same time, it's very unlikely that any of your doctors ever said to you, well, what can you learn from this?
Not one.
And what does this tell you about how you've been living your life?
Yeah.
And how do you need to apply those lessons moving forward in the future? So for all its achievements, Western medicine separates the mind from the body and the individual from the environment. And so when you say, well, how can we move forward? It's first of all, let our experiences be our teachers. And when you're experiencing distress, and it doesn't have to be severe disease or depression, it can just be irritability, back spasms, poor sleep, frequent colds, skin rashes, anxiety, relationship, chronic relationship difficulties, whatever's showing up in your life, rather than seeing them purely as problems to be solved. I mean, yeah, you want to solve them, but purely as problems as well. See them, what are they telling me? What is it that I don't know about myself? So you have to have that curiosity.
Of course. Great tool.
That's the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if I am depressed, what did I push down? And how did that serve me? Why did I learn to push myself down? Because I'm not stupid, and it's an adaptation. So what was going on in my life? Now, it's hard for people to do this on their own, but they can do the reading, or they can talk to a therapist. And once you start asking the questions, the answers will start arising. The trouble is that in our society, we are taught that these things are normal and just part of life, and we never actually ask, well, what's really going on, and does it have to be this way?
You're so right. And I know, excuse me, when I had this aha moment, this awakening in the hospital, and I finally let it all out, right? Yeah. That is when the traditional Western world that I'm the biggest fan of, right? And has saved my life over and over and over. But that's when it's perceived as a problem. When we start to express that emotion. And I remember I just started, like, before this point, I had been entertaining 60 guests per day, right? I was a hostess with the mostest. I was just like, this is a blip on my path, this big diagnosis of acute myeloid leukemia, right? Just a blip on the path. I'll be fine in no time. And then when I finally started to express it, that's when it was considered to be a problem. Right. Yeah. That's when the psychiatry team and everyone came in with their clipboards in hand and wanting to prescribe everything under the sun. But I had to advocate for myself, saying, no, I don't want to conceal this. Right. I need to let out this hurt. The only thing that's going to fix this is being mummy to those two amazing boys that just left with this complete stranger who I don't even know. And I need to let myself feel this. Right. But you really do have to advocate for yourself in today's society to do.
Well, let me tell you a funny story. So there's a book called Into the Magic Shop. It's by James Doty, who's a neurosurgeon at Stanford in California. And Doty, it's a bestseller, and Doty has had to do some work on himself, like the rest of us. And when he talks about some of his deep experiences, and he talks about it, I interviewed him once on stage in front of an audience. And sometimes he just starts crying. So he told me the story that he was once giving a presentation and he started crying because he was feeling so moved. And the psychiatrist comes up to him afterwards and says, Dr. Doty, a couple of sessions with me, we can fix this. And Doty said, I don't want it fixed.
Yeah, that's all about what we were talking about in childhood, right? And what we do as parents, like go to your room, come back when your behavior is fitting, right? But you're right, it stems back to childhood and it's still put on us as adults. But yeah, really having to advocate for yourself and be strong about that, because I didn't want to conceal that with medication. I just really needed to let that out. One of my favorite quotes is we can't heal. We can't heal in the same environment that made us sick, right? So we really do need to take a hard look around and take accountability for where we're at and really look to see where we can take that proactive change and really implement that and use that adversity as our wake-up call, like we were talking about, to grow into the most beautiful of flowers, or to grow your wings to fly, right? And take back that power. One thing I really want to talk about, another really great quote, is for those habituated to high levels of internal stress since early childhood, it is then the absence of stress that creates unease, evoking boredom and a sense of meaninglessness. Yeah. And I totally relate with that myself, because again, in that go, go, go attitude, right, that so many of us are plunked in, and we don't even take the time, like I said, to hear those screams in your body. But please tell me more about this. I love this quote.
Well, I mean, I'm like that. I've been like that. So that just rest and calmness and just being are difficult qualities for me, because something in me just wants to keep driving. And that's strictly a outcome of childhood conditioning under situations of stress. So when the stress is not there, it doesn't feel normal. And you don't feel comfortable with yourself. And this society thrives on people not being comfortable with themselves. So anything to distract ourselves from ourselves, the internet, games, toys, objects, food, work, like anything to get us away from ourselves. And yet that quality of being and just resting in our being is our birthright, you know, and it's also our true nature.
Yes.
But I, you know, and the cost we pay for losing that is tremendous. You know, you mentioned my book, When the Body Says No. Even it was 2 years ago, coming up now, that my wife said to me, you know, you've written a book called When the Body Says No. No, you better write one called When the Wife Says No.
No, it's true. I love that.
Because I'm not putting up with this anymore.
Such a great perspective of that go nature, right? Because I mean, the biggest gift on my journey that I've taken away, and there are so many silver linings despite all the immense hardships, the biggest gift that I've been bestowed from these awakenings is this calm in my heart that I never otherwise had before. In my previous self, I would have been like this go mama, right? Like even with my kids, like let's run to the end to Dunderave and we'll run back and I might give you 2 minutes to play at the beach. But now my kids can play for hours, right? Building forts at the beach. And now I just find a little log, I sit down, I cross my little legs and I can watch them for hours just frolicking. And I am so content with this calm in my heart. And it is such a gift.
Well, how great for your kids. I wish I'd been able to do that to my children when they were small, but I didn't. I wasn't, you know. And of course, then the child takes that on.
Yeah.
The restlessness. I'm just writing a chapter for my new book on the irreducible needs for the child, and my really good friend Gordon Neufeld, with a psychologist with whom I actually wrote a book, Hold On to Your Kids. It's his book, but he says that that inside the relationship, the child needs such nurturance, such an invitation to exist, that the child can rest from the working of earning his right to be who he is as he is. That children shouldn't have to work to earn the rest. The rest comes from, I'm okay exactly the way I am and accepted. So he says one of the securities, Gordon calls it rest. And he says when the child can rest in the knowledge that he doesn't have to do anything, she doesn't have to do anything to gain the parent's approval and acceptance. The child can't get that unless the parent herself is at rest.
No, of course. They can't experience it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's powerful. Tell us a bit more about your new book.
Speaking of lack of rest.
I know you've had your whole heart and soul poured into this. I just admire you so much for what you do and give to the world, right? It's amazing.
But what I mean with this book is it's called The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture. And I'm in a good phase with it now because I wrote this manuscript, and to make a long story short, it was meant to be 150,000 words long. It became 285,000 words.
Wow.
But there's way too much in it. And that's because I couldn't rest in the security that I've set enough. I wanted to prove everything. And I was age 76, just turned 77. So when I was writing it last year, I was 76, still not convinced that anything useful to say. I mean, I had lost confidence in myself. And I had nothing new to say, or I was not saying it right. So as a result, I packed it with way too much stuff. Now I have the real joy. Oh, okay, I've said it. I've got it out of me. I can just have to say about what is it that, not what I need to say to prove everything, but what does the reader need to learn? That's a totally different question. So now I have the joy of just cutting it and revising it and rewriting it, and it's going to be much shorter and much more to the point and a much better read. But I even knowing all that I know, I really put myself through the ringer of telling myself the story one more time that I'm not good enough and this is not going to work. That was my process. It was hard. Now I had lots of help, and I knew, and at least I knew enough to get help. And I even started talking to a therapist again after all these years. So once a week for several months last year, I spoke to a therapist, and that really made a difference. But what I'm saying is that because of the pressure I put on myself, as somebody said to me, it's not the book that makes you feel so bad; it's your relationship with the book.
Mm-hmm.
And once I corrected that relationship, it's just a joy to create. It really is. I love it.
That's beautiful. But with like such courage, right, to go through that stage of vulnerability, and for our listeners, like, holy cow, the world-renowned Dr. Gabor Maté also questions himself, right?
The word on Dr. Gabor Maté was panicking, and his blood pressure was going up, and so on. So now the good thing is, and I wasn't doing what I needed to take care of myself. So almost 2 months ago now, I decided, okay, you got this yoga practice that you learned. Do it, for God's sakes. And I started doing it. So twice a day, 45 minutes. Doesn't matter what's going on. I do my yoga. And I have to tell you, I'm boasting here, but a couple of weeks ago, it was 10:30 in the evening, and I still hadn't done my yoga. So you know what I did? I did it twice.
Oh, good for you.
Until midnight. So as a result, I'm experiencing more space inside myself.
Beautiful.
And that space then allows me to approach the writing with much more peace.
Beautiful.
And these stories in my head that I'm not good enough and so on, I can notice them, but if they show up, but I don't have to listen to them.
Powerful.
So really, I think one of the things I say to people is you have to have space between yourself and your mind, because your mind is conditioned by those earliest experiences. It can't help telling you what it tells you, but you don't have to believe it.
Yeah.
But for that, you need some space.
Yes. We always have to create, I call it the space to be vulnerable, but, and that notion of being compassionate, right? Like, we can't be in a state of judgment, whether it's judgment towards ourselves or judgment towards others, and compassion at the same time. And so really switching from that is so needed, right? To find that self-compassion towards ourselves for our own struggles as we've gone through, just as we would be compassionate for others.
Well, and I would say as well that it's not even that we can't be judgmental, because the fact is you can't help it. You're not making the judgments of yourself or anybody else. You're not doing that. Your brain does it automatically. So for me to tell myself I shouldn't be judgmental is already a trip I'm laying on myself.
But I find through awareness, right, when I find I'm judgmental on myself in situations, I find through awareness and practice of repetition, right, then I come from that point of compassion instead of judgment. If I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't get much done today, right, I come from more of a point of compassion, and I'm like, oh gosh, I just had a huge surgery 2 days ago. I need more time to heal. So it's more for me just shifting that mindset.
That's exactly right. So it's not that you shouldn't be judgmental. It's that you notice when you are.
Yes.
And you notice, you're aware when the judgment arises, and then you can let go of it. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's like, don't judge yourself for being judgmental. Like that's just something that the mind does. But as you just said, you can be aware of it, and that awareness is really the key to everything.
Yeah. The absolute key. And I know, Gabor, you are off to go swimming right after this, and we do not want you to be late for your pool adventures today. I cannot thank you enough for your time. Is there lasting words of wisdom that you can share with our listeners today?
Well, I've worked a lot with my own and other people's traumas, developmental issues. I've seen mental health conditions, severe addictions, disease of all kinds. And what I can tell people is that the healing of that traumatic wound is always possible. So that nobody needs to give up on themselves. Nobody's damaged goods. Just as you find out yourself, Erica, through your own very hard work and very tough experience, that reconnection with yourself is available to you. It's a
profound gift.
It's available to everybody, and that's a gift that's built into being a human being. And so that we can all rest in that and look for it and find it. So nobody ever ought to give up on themselves, or on anybody else for that matter.
Believe in you, see it, feel it, and believe in it.
Yeah.
Gabor, this has been beautiful.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Gabor. Up next, listeners, we've got Carter Perry, the Hawaiian surfer who faced a superbug recently and lost half of his lower leg and lost a lung. So join us for that. Do not miss it. It starts at 2 p.m. All the best.